Hello, everybody. Welcome to what may, in fact, be the final chapters of Emma. I suspect this will at least, if nothing else, be the penultimate video, if not the final one. Thank you, phone, for notifying me that my video was live. It's very useful. I had somehow the notification noises, just the notification volume, had gotten turned all the way down on my phone. And it's been...
But not on purpose?
No, it does that sometimes. I don't know if it's like a quirk of this particular phone model or something, but I'll mute the phone in general for some reason, like I'm live streaming. And even when I turn the volume back on, everything else, the volume will be turned back to what it was before, except notifications will stay. The volume turned all the way down. It's really weird. You have to go into the notifications menu to specifically turn the volume back up. Anyway.
Lots more ice cream sandwiches.
Oh, that's good to know, Michelle, because usually when I go back and watch the videos after the fact, it starts like the second I click start stream. So it starts with me being like staring at the screen, doing nothing, and then going, okay, we're live. So I guess I'll in the future, I'll do a little like dance while I'm waiting for it to start. All right. Hello, Esty. Hello, Michelle. Glad you're both here. Pepper is here too. He's in his favorite Amazon box. And I don't know if that's his favorite box. There's a few boxes around the apartment right now. That's the only one from Amazon. So it's
to be tied to one box.
Exactly. See, this one's sitting out flat, so it's like a bed. Some of them are sitting up on their side, and they're kind of like a cave. So, it's just a different vibe, It's what everybody feels like. So we will be starting today with chapter 53. Just a reminder, there are 55 chapters in this book. So we'll see. We'll see how long.
It sure doesn't look like there's that much left, but...
Right? Yeah, it doesn't look like 3 chapters. That's why I thought we might get through it today.
Yeah, but who knows? They're all over the place. So
if the last 3 chapters involve a lengthy speech by Miss Bates, it would take longer.
That's true.
So let us begin. So Emma and Jane kind of finally got on the same page in the last chapter and actually communicated for the first time in their lives and basically became friends of a sort.
Yes. Now that they aren't going to be near each other anymore.
Yeah. Now that they're not going to live near each other, they're finally on friendly terms. Although I'm sure she'll come back to visit. So her aunt and grandmother still live there. So anyway, it's nice. It's a nice kind of solution or resolution rather of that storyline, specifically Emma and Jane's relationship. So that's nice. That's what we just.
Sorry.
Oh, that's okay. It's okay. We're just, having a little catch up here.
Yeah.
It's not a big deal. So, let me say, that's basically where we're at right now. We still have not broken the news to Mr. Woodhouse, I believe. And Emma and Harriet have not actually resolved anything. So that has yet to be done. These are the things that I'm expecting Jane Austen to finish up before the end of the book. We shall see.
Jane, you're on notice.
Okay. Chapter 53. Mrs. Weston's friends were all made happy by her safety. Was she in danger?
Wait, who's safety?
Mrs. Weston.
Are we sure that's the she that
I don't know. They must be talking about her pregnancy. They must be talking about her pregnancy because it was hinted at that she was pregnant.
Oh, that's right.
Weird way to put it, but all right. Mrs. Weston's friends were all made happy by her safety. And if the satisfaction of her well-doing could be increased to Emma, it was by knowing her to be the mother of a little girl. I guess that's an awkward way of saying Mrs. Weston gave birth to her child and she was fine.
Oh, okay.
I think that's what it is. I was just like,
wow, okay.
I was like, happy in her safety. I suddenly was like, wait, was she in danger? Should I have been worried? Oh, all right. Emma is pleased that she's mother to a little girl. She had been decided in wishing for a Miss Weston. She would not acknowledge that it was with any view of making a match for her hereafter with either of Isabella's sons, but it obviously had occurred to her.
Yes.
But she was convinced that a daughter would suit both father and mother best. Well, you would know, Emma, you who are basically a literal child still yourself. It would be a great comfort to Mr. Weston as he grew older. Oh, she's projecting, I get it.
Yeah.
And even Mr. Weston might be growing older 10 years hence, to have his fireside enlivened by the sports and the nonsense, the freaks and the fancies of a child never banished from home. And Mrs. Weston, no one could doubt that a daughter would be most to her, and it would be quite a pity that anyone who so well knew how to teach should not have their powers in exercise again. She has had the advantage, you know, of practicing on me, she continued. Like la baronne d'Allemagne on la Comtesse d'Ostalis, in Madame de Genlis, Adelaide, and Theodore. I don't know if that's a play or a book. And we shall now see her own little Adelaide educated on a more perfect plan. That is, replied Mr. Knightley. She will indulge her even more than she did you, and believe that she does not indulge her at all. It will be the only difference. Poor child, cried Emma. At that rate, what will become of her?
Well, that is a thought.
Nothing very bad. The fate of thousands. She will be disagreeable in infancy and correct herself as she grows older. I am losing all my bitterness against spoiled children, my dearest Emma.
Wow. Okay.
I, who am owing all my happiness to you, would not it be horrible ingratitude in me to be severe on them? I hope he's teasing her.
Yeah.
Emma laughed. Okay, that seems to support that he's not being totally serious. And replied, but I had the assistance of all your endeavors to counteract the indulgence of other people. I doubt whether my own sense would have corrected me without it. Do you? I have no doubt. Nature gave you understanding. Miss Taylor gave you principles. You must have done well. They do say love is blind. Yeah. My interference was quite as likely to do harm as good. It was very natural for you to say, what right has he to lecture me? And I am afraid very natural for you to feel that it was done in a disagreeable manner. I do not believe I did you any good. The good was all to myself, by making you an object of the tenderest affection to me. I could not think about you so much without doting on you, faults and all, and by dint of fancying so many errors, have been in love with you since you were 13 at least. Oh, that's uncomfortable. Nope.
Oh my God.
Nope.
Just stop. Stop talking.
Stop talking, Mr. Knightley. You're really ruining it for me here.
Like, it's already a bad speech. Like, his logic is like,
yeah,
whatever, dude.
It's already a considerable age gap from 21 to 37. Yeah. But when you point out, oh, also, I've been in love with her since she was 13, you are not making this better.
Right, yeah.
You're not making yourself look better, my dude. That's not good. It's not good. Okay, moving on.
As Michael Scott would say, oh, for the love of God, stop talking.
How often, when you were a girl, have you said to me with one of your saucy looks, Mr. Knightley, I am going to do so-and-so. Papa says I may. Or, I have Miss Taylor's leave, something which, you knew, I did not approve. In such cases, my interference was giving you 2 bad feelings instead of 1. What an amiable creature I was. No wonder you should hold my speeches in such affectionate remembrance. Mr. Knightley. You always called me Mr. Knightley, and from habit, it has not so very formal a sound. And yet it is formal. I want you to call me something else, but I do not know what. Yeah, like your freaking name, maybe? I remember once calling you George in one of my amiable fits about 10 years ago. I did it because I thought it would offend you, but as you made no objection, I never did it again. And cannot you call me George now? Wait, is George his Christian name?
It sounds like it.
I guess it must be. That makes sense.
That would be why it would
offend
him.
Yeah.
As if she as a youngster called him by his first name.
Yeah.
But
and it would make sense. What's what one of the kids, one of the boys, one of the nephews is named George. It's probably his father's name, or at least a family name.
I mean, John, George, you know.
Yeah, but
keep using the same names.
And cannot you call me George now? Impossible. I can never call you anything but Mr. Knightley. I will not promise even to equal the elegant terseness of Mrs. Elton by calling you Mr. K. But I will promise, she added presently, laughing and blushing, I will promise to call you once by your Christian name. I do not say when, but perhaps you may guess where. In the building in which N takes M for better or worse. N takes M? I mean, presumably she's talking about like at their wedding.
Or the wedding night.
In the building in which N takes M for better for worse.
No, yeah, probably the wedding.
Right, he says for better for worse, but like N takes M. I don't know. If anyone has any ideas what that means, let us know. Emma grieved that she could not be more openly just to one important service which his better sense would have rendered her, to the advice which would have saved her from the worst of all her womanly follies, and which there are many, her willful intimacy with Harriet Smith. But it was too tender a subject. You being friends with Harriet Smith was not the problem here.
Yeah.
It said you were a bad friend. Yes, Michelle, but whose initials? That's what we don't know. Or what's initials? Initials of who or what?
It's probably supposed to be Emma, like reducing the first syllable of her name to a letter. But I don't know about N.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like it can be Emma. That would be a good theory if it was G takes M or K takes M or something. Something that could be
going with the consonant sound of Knightley.
Yeah,
kind of a stretch, but it's the only thing
Emma?
I can think of.
It seems like a real stretch, and I don't know why she would say it, but
who else in this? It's probably one of those charades.
Yeah, honestly, that is the best answer that I think anybody could possibly come up with without having like read on the subject and knowing the answer. So I say that's what it means, and she's just being weird. Oh, it was too tender a subject. She could not enter on it. Harriet was very seldom mentioned between them. This, on his side, might merely proceed from her not being thought of, but Emma was rather inclined to attribute it to delicacy and a suspicion, from some appearances, that their friendship were declining. She was aware herself that, parting under any other circumstances, they certainly should have corresponded more, and that her intelligence would not have rested, as it now almost wholly did, on Isabella's letters. He might observe that it was so. The pain of being obliged to practice concealment towards him was very little inferior to the pain of having made Harriet unhappy. Isabella sent quite as good an account of her visitor as could be expected. On her first arrival, she had thought her out of spirits, which appeared perfectly natural, as there was a dentist to be consulted. But since that business had been over, she did not appear to find Harriet different from what she had known her before. Isabella, to be sure, was no very quick observer, yet if Harriet had not been equal to playing with the children, it would not have escaped her. Emma's comforts and hopes were most agreeably carried on by Harriet's being to stay longer. Her fortnight was likely to be a month at least. Mr. and Mrs. John Knightley were to come down in August, and she was invited to remain till they could bring her back. "John does not even mention your friend," said Mr. Knightley. "Here is his answer, if you like to see it." It was the answer to the communication of his intended marriage. Emma accepted it with a very eager hand, with an impatience all alive to know what he would say about it, and not at all checked by hearing that her friend was unmentioned. "John enters like a brother into my happiness," continued Mr. Knightley, "but he is no complimenter, and though I well know him to have, likewise, a most brotherly affection for you, he is so far from making flourishes that any other young woman might think him rather cool in her praise. But I am not afraid of your seeing what he writes." "He writes like a sensible man," replied Emma when she had read the letter. "I honor his sincerity. It is very plain that he considers the good fortune of the engagement as all on my side, but that he is not without hope of my growing, in time, as worthy of your affection as you think me already. Had he said anything to bear a different construction, I should not have believed him." "My Emma, he means no such thing. He only means—" He and I should differ very little in our estimations of the two, interrupted she, with a sort of serious smile. Much less, perhaps, than he is aware of, if we could enter without ceremony or reserve on the subject. Emma, my dear Emma. She cried with more thorough gaiety. If you fancy your brother does not do me justice, only wait till my dear father is in the secret and hear his opinion. Depend upon it, he will be much farther from doing you justice. He will think all the happiness, all the advantage on your side of the question, all the merit on mine. I wish I may not sink into poor Emma with him at once. His tender compassion towards oppressed worth can go no farther. Ah, he cried, I wish your father might be half as easily convinced as John will be, of our having every right that equal worth can give to be happy together. I'm amused by one part of John's letter, did you notice it? Where he says that my information did not take him wholly by surprise, that he was rather in expectation of hearing something of the kind. If I understand your brother, he only means so far as your having some thoughts of marrying. He had no idea of me. He seems perfectly unprepared for that. Yes, but I'm amused that he should have seen so far into my feelings. What has he been judging by? I am not conscious of any difference in my spirits or conversation that could prepare him at this time for my marrying any more than at another. But it was so, I suppose. I dare say there was a difference when I was staying with them the other day. I believe I did not play with the children quite so much as usual. I remember one evening the poor boys saying, Uncle seems always tired now.
Well, he is old.
I know, practically ancient. The time was coming when the news must spread farther, and other persons' reception of it be tried. As soon as Mrs. Weston was sufficiently recovered to admit Mr. Woodhouse's visits, Emma, having it in view that her gentle reasoning should be employed in the cause, resolved first to announce it at home and then at Randall's, that how to break it to her father at last. She had bound herself to do it in such an honor of Mr. Knightley's absence, or when it came to the point her heart would have failed her, but she must have put it off. And she must have put it off. But Mr. Knightley was to come at such a time and follow up the beginning she was to make. She was forced to speak, and to speak cheerfully, too. She must not make it a more decided subject of misery to him by a melancholy tone herself. She must not appear to think it a misfortune. With all the spirits she could command, she prepared him first for something strange, and then, in a few words, said that if his consent and approbation could be obtained, which she trusted would be attended with no difficulty, since it was a plan to promote the happiness of all, she and Mr. Knightley meant to marry, by which means Hartfield would receive the constant addition of that person's company, who she knew he loved, next to his daughters and Mrs. Weston, best in the world. Poor man! It was at first a considerable shock to him, and he tried earnestly to dissuade her from it. She was reminded more than once of her having always said she would never marry, and assured that it would be a great deal better for her to remain single, and told of poor Isabella and poor Miss Taylor. But it would not do. Emma hung about him affectionately and smiled, and said it must be so, and that he must not class her with Isabella and Mrs. Weston, whose marriages, taking them from Hartfield, had, indeed, made a melancholy change. But she was not going from Hartfield. She should always be there. She was introducing no change in their numbers or their comforts, but for the better. And she was very sure that he would be a great deal the happier. And she was very sure he would be a great deal the happier for having Mr. Knightley always at hand, when he were once got used to the idea. Did he not love Mr. Knightley very much? He would not deny that he did, she was sure. Whom did he ever want to consult on business but Mr. Knightley? Who was so useful to him? Who so ready to write his letters? Who so glad to assist him? Who so cheerful, so attentive, so attached to him? Would he not like to have him always on the spot? Yes, this was all very true. Mr. Knightley could not be there too often. He should be glad to see him every day, but they did see him every day as it was. Why could not they go on as they had done? Oh, Mr. Woodhouse, there we go. Emma hung about him affectionately is the caption for this illustration. I love it. He's sitting there in the chair. She's got a pillow for him to make him more comfortable. She's pulling up a chair to sit next to him, just the way he likes. All right. Mr. Woodhouse could not be soon reconciled, but the worst was overcome. The idea was given. Time and continual repetition must do the rest. To Emma's entreaties and assurances succeeded Mr. Knightley's, whose fond praise of her gave the subject even a kind of welcome, and he was soon used to be talked to by each on every fair occasion. They had all the assistance which Isabella could give, by letters of the strongest approbation, and Mrs. Weston was ready, on the first meeting, to consider the subject in the most serviceable light, first as a settled, and secondly as a good one. Well aware of the near equal importance of the two recommendations to Mr. Woodhouse's mind, it was agreed upon as what was to be, and everybody by whom he was used to be guided, assuring him that it would be for his happiness, and having some feelings himself which almost admitted it, he began to think that some time or another, in another year or two perhaps, it might not be so very bad if the marriage did take place. In another year or two perhaps, it might not be so bad. Oh, Mr. Woodhouse. Mrs. Weston was acting no part, feigning no feelings in all that she said to him in favor of the event. She had been extremely surprised, never more so, than when Emma first opened the affair to her, but she saw in it only increase of happiness to all, and had no scruple in urging him to the utmost. She had such a regard for Mr. Knightley as to think he deserved even her dearest Emma, and it was in every respect so proper, suitable, and unexceptionable a connection, and in one respect, one point of the highest importance, so peculiarly eligible. I didn't know that the phrase peculiarly eligible would be so hard to say until I had to say it.
Yes.
So singularly fortunate that now it seemed as if Emma could not safely have attached herself to any other creature, and that she had herself been the stupidest of beings in not having thought of it and wished it long ago. How very few of those men in a rank of life to address Emma would have renounced their own home for Hartfield. And who but Mr. Knightley could know and bear with Mr. Woodhouse, so as to make such an arrangement desirable? The difficulty of disposing of poor Mr. Woodhouse had been always felt in her husband's plans and her own for a marriage between Frank and Emma. Disposing of him. Ooh.
Indeed, yes.
My goodness.
That's what we're always concerned
with. Between Frank and Emma. How to settle the claims of Enscombe and Hartfield had been a continual impediment, less acknowledged by Mr. Weston than by herself, and even he had never been able to finish the subject better than by saying, "Those matters will take care of themselves. The young people will find a way." But here there was nothing to be shifted off in a wild speculation on the future. It was all right, all open, all equal. No sacrifice on any side worth the name. It was a union of the highest promise of felicity in itself, and without one real rational difficulty to oppose or delay it. Mrs. Weston, with her baby on her knee, indulging in such reflections as these, was one of the happiest women in the world. If anything could increase her delight, it was perceiving that the baby would soon have outgrown its first set of caps.
Caps.
I guess she's just saying that the baby's growing very quickly.
Yeah, it must be, but I don't know what caps are.
Caps? Like hats? Little bonnets?
Oh my God.
It's okay. You were just in the outside world. It's very stressful. You only just got to sit down.
I was just thinking of something else entirely, I don't know what. Okay. Like capped teeth or, like that kind of a cap. Which, yeah, anyway.
All right, we're all caught up on what caps mean. The news was universally a surprise wherever it spread, and Mr. Weston had his 5-minute share of it, but 5 minutes were enough to familiarize the idea to his quickness of mind. He saw the advantages of the match and rejoiced in them with all the constancy of his wife, but the wonder of it was very soon nothing. By the end of the hour, he was not far from believing he had always foreseen it.
Yes.
Oh, Michelle said her brain went to teeth too.
Ah, okay. I'm not completely insane.
Yeah. Not completely. I love Mr. Weston's He's so quick to be like, as soon as something happens, he's like, yes, I always wanted it this way. He's basically like, yes, of course Mr. Knightley and Emma will marry. I mean, like, who could ever want her to marry anyone else? Not me.
It's like an extension of his, but this is better.
Yeah. Everything is always
everything.
Yeah, well, it's the same thing, because he previously wanted Frank and Emma to get married.
Yeah.
And now he's completely like, well, this is obviously better in every way.
Yeah.
Obviously, I always thought that I've always shipped Mr. Knightley and Emma.
And so did I. I warned the girls.
Oh, it is a secret. It is to be a secret, I conclude, said he. These matters are always a secret till it is found out that everybody knows them. Only let me be told when I may speak out. I wonder whether Jane has any suspicion. He went to Highbury the next morning and satisfied himself on that point. He told her the news. Was not she like a daughter, his eldest daughter? He must tell her. They're not even married yet. And he's like, well, basically, she's my daughter. I have to tell her. And also, I will come up with similar excuses why I have to tell everyone else.
Yes, he will.
He told her the news. Yes, he must tell her. And Miss Bates being present, it passed, of course, to Mrs. Cole. And Mrs. Perry and Mrs. Elton immediately afterwards. I love that he's like, oh, it's supposed to be a secret, but that everyone will find out anyway. I guess I might as well tell everybody.
Yeah.
That's a self-fulfilling prophecy if I ever heard one.
Yep.
It was no more than the principals were prepared for. They had calculated from the time of its being known at Randall's how soon it would be over Highbury, and were thinking of themselves as the evening wonder in many a family circle with great sagacity. Sagacity?
That's how I've always heard it, yeah.
I'm just realizing I don't know that I've heard that word said aloud many times. Mostly just
I feel like I actually looked it up one time because I wasn't sure.
It seems like sagacity would be weird.
Yeah.
Just linguistically, it makes more sense for it to be sagacity.
Yeah.
Even though the word is sage.
Yes.
In general, it was a very well-approved match. Some might think him, and others might think her, the most in luck. One set might recommend their all removing to Donwell and leaving Hartfield for the John Knightleys, and another might predict disagreements among the servants. But yet, upon the whole, there was no serious objection raised, except in one habitation, the vicarage. There, the surprise was not softened by any satisfaction. Mm-hmm. Mr. Elton cared little about it, compared with his wife. He only hoped the young lady's pride would now be contented, and supposed she had always meant to catch Knightley if she could, and on the point of living at Hartfield, could daringly exclaim, rather he than I. But Mrs. Elton was very much discomposed indeed. Poor Knightley, poor fellow. Sad business for him. She was extremely concerned, for though very eccentric, he had 1,000 good qualities. How could he be so taken in? Did not think him at all in love, not in the least. Poor Knightley. There would be an end to all pleasant intercourse with him. How happy he had been to come and dine with them whenever they asked him. But that would be all over now. Poor fellow. No more exploring parties to Donwell made for her. Oh, no. There would be a Mrs. Knightley to throw cold water on everything. Extremely disagreeable. But she was not at all sorry that she had abused the housekeeper the other day. Shocking plan, living together. It would never do. She knew a family near Maple Grove who had tried it, and been obliged to separate before the end of the first quarter. She always knows better.
She'd abused the housekeeper?
Oh yeah, she'd said something really rude about his housekeeper. I can't remember I don't remember what the context or reason was. Very little, knowing Mrs. Elton.
When they were planning the Box Hill party. Or no, the Donwell party.
No, recently it came up again.
Oh. Okay.
When they were planning the Donwell party, she says, oh, my housekeeper is so very clever. And Mr. Knightley's like, if you'll pardon me, so is mine.
Yeah.
And then she just shuts up on the subject. And then later, I can't remember why, she brings up that like, oh, really? The Donwell Abbey housekeeper is just awful. She mentions her name and everything.
It was when she was confused about the date of the meeting.
Oh, yes.
That Mr. Elton and Mr. Knightley were having.
And she's like, oh, Mr. Knightley would never not be there for you to arrive. It must be the housekeeper's fault.
Yeah. And she was...
Mr. Knightley must have left...
She said something.
She clearly left a message. Too. Yeah. And then the servant screwed it up. I never thought that housekeeper was any good. Yeah, she's...
That was what it was.
Yeah, she was being awful as usual.
Yep.
Oh, and since she wants to know a family in Maple Grove, for whom living with a parent didn't work. Obviously, it will never work for anyone.
Yes, of course.
Chapter live. That's 54. That's chapter live. This is the chapter. I know it seems weird since it's but towards the end. But Liv Tyler joins the cast just right at the end of the book.
Or Liv Moore. That would be
I don't know who Liv Moore is
from iZombie.
No,
that would be a Rob Thomas thing to do.
All right. Time passed on. A few more tomorrows, and the party from London would be arriving. It was an alarming change. And Emma was thinking of it one morning as what must bring a great deal to agitate and grieve her, when Mr. Knightley came in, and distressing thoughts were put by. After the first chat of pleasure, he was silent, and then, in a graver tone, began with, "I have something to tell you, Emma. Some news." "Good or bad?" said she quickly, looking up in his face. "I do not know what it ought to be called." "Oh, good, I am sure. I see it in your countenance. You are trying not to smile." "I am afraid," said he, composing his features. "I am very much afraid, my dear Emma, that you will not smile when you hear it." "Indeed, but why so? I can hardly imagine that anything which pleases or amuses you should not please and amuse me too." "There is one subject," he replied, "I hope but one, on which we do not think alike." He paused a moment, again smiling, with his eyes fixed on her face. "Does nothing occur to you? Do you not recollect? Harriet Smith?" Her cheeks flushed at the name, and she felt afraid of something, though she knew not what. Have you heard from her yourself this morning?" cried he. "You have, I believe, and know the whole." "No, I have not. I know nothing. Pray tell me." "You are prepared for the worst, I see, and very bad it is. Harriet Smith marries Robert Martin." Emma gave a start, which did not seem like being prepared, and her eyes in eager gaze said, "No, this is impossible," but her lips were closed. "It is so indeed," continued Mr. Knightley. "I have it from Robert Martin himself. He left me not half an hour ago." She was still looking at him with the most speaking amazement. "You like it, my Emma, as little as I feared. I wish our opinions were the same, but in time they will. Time, you may be very sure, will make one or the other of us think differently, and in the meanwhile, we need not talk much on the subject." "You mistake me. You quite mistake me," she replied, exerting herself. "It is not that such a circumstance would now make me unhappy, but I cannot believe it. It seems an impossibility. You cannot mean that Harriet Smith has accepted Robert Martin. You cannot mean that he has even proposed to her again. Yet. You only mean that he intends it." "I mean that he has done it," answered Mr. Knightley with smiling but determined decision, "and been accepted. I love that the thing she's most shocked about is that, like, it could have happened without her knowing about it, really. It seems like that. She's like, "No, you mean he's just thinking about it, not that it's already happened and he's been accepted. Like, surely I would have to be involved in such an event in some way, or I would hear about it."
That's interesting, because
Or maybe she's just surprised it happened so quickly because Harriet was supposed to still be in London. I guess
I'm
that's
reading
the most
it as
charitable.
she's surprised because the last time she's been under the impression that Harriet has been madly in love with Mr. Knightley this whole time, and so she's surprised that he was accepted.
But she's not just surprised that he was accepted. She's surprised that he's even asked. She says, "You must mean only that he's thinking about asking." But I guess that would just be that's
kind of the same.
I guess it's the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess.
I mean, I can understand her being surprised that he would ask again.
Yeah.
Because it's been mentioned multiple times. Like the same reason Elizabeth doesn't expect Mr. Darcy to ever ask again.
Right. Yeah.
Like men when they're turned
down
down
happen
once.
very often.
Yeah. Apart from Mr. Collins, men when they're turned down once tend to not ask again.
No.
At least proposals of marriage. So yeah, I guess we're just reading that differently.
Yeah. No, I guess, yeah, that is a reasonable reading of it. My immediate thought was her just being like, "Wait, no, that's too much to have happened without me hearing about it."
Yeah.
I might be wrong. That's just maybe just me reading
she
it.
hasn't been corresponding with Harriet as much. Though.
Yeah,
like
that's true.
Their friendship, like they've deliberately been kind of strict.
Yeah. I guess there's plenty of reasons for her to be surprised by it, including that Harriet was supposed to be in London until today.
Like she's been operating under the impression that Harriet's feelings have not changed since she left.
Yeah. Probably also she still believes so much in her power over Harriet that the idea that Harriet could like Robert again seems completely impossible.
Yeah.
Good God, she cried. Well, and having recourse to her work basket, an excuse for leaning down her face, and concealing all the exquisite feelings of delight and entertainment which she knew she must be expressing, she added, well, now tell me everything. Make this intelligible to me. How, where, when? Let me know it all. I never was more surprised, but it does not make me unhappy, I assure you. How has it been possible? It is a very simple story. He went to town on business 3 days ago, and I got him to take charge of some papers which I was wanting to send to John. He delivered these papers to John at his chambers, and was asked by him to join their party the same evening to Astley's. They were going to take the 2 eldest boys to Astley's. Repetitive. The party was to be our brother and sister, Henry, John, and Miss Smith. Oh, it's John. It says John with like a long dash. I'm not sure if that's like hiding the last name, but John is the name of one of the little boys, right? No.
Oh,
George.
I think he means John, his brother.
No, he says the party was to be our brother and sister, John and Isabella, Henry, John Blank, and Miss Smith.
Oh, I don't know.
Is one of the little boys named John or George? No, I'm not sure.
Who can keep track? I mean, there's more than. I mean, the oldest is Henry, obviously, but I don't know what the second oldest.
Yeah, I guess I don't know. I don't remember how many children they have.
Yeah, a lot.
They only ever seem to mention 2 boys.
The youngest is named Emma, and the oldest is named Henry. And how many are in between?
Yeah,
I have no idea.
I feel like they've mentioned 2 boys, and the rest were girls, I thought, but I might be wrong.
Yeah.
My friend Robert could not resist. They called for him in their way, were all extremely amused, and my brother asked him to dine with them the next day, which he did, and in the course of that visit, as I understand, he found an opportunity of speaking to Harriet, and certainly did not speak in vain. She made him, by her acceptance, as happy even as he is deserving. He came down by yesterday's coach, and was with me this morning, immediately after breakfast, to report his proceedings, first on my affairs, and then on his own. This is all that I can relate of the how, where, and when. Your friend Harriet will make a much longer history when you see her. She will give you all the minute particulars which only women's language can make interesting. Gross. In our communications, we deal only in the great. However, I must say that Robert Martin's heart seemed for him, and to me, very overflowing, and that he did mention, without its being much to the purpose, that on quitting their box at Astley's, my brother took charge of Mrs. John Knightley and little John, and he followed with Miss Smith and Henry, and that at one time they were in such a crowd as to make Miss Smith rather uneasy. He stopped. Emma dared not attempt any immediate reply. To speak, she was sure, would be to betray a most unreasonable degree of happiness. She must wait a moment, or he would think her mad. Her silence disturbed him, and after observing her a little while, he added, Emma, my love, you said that this circumstance would not now make you unhappy, but I am afraid it gives you more pain than you expected. His situation is an evil, but you must consider it as what satisfies your friend, and I will answer for your thinking better and better of him as you know him more. His good sense and good principles would delight you. As far as a man is concerned, you could not wish your friend in better hands. His rank in society I would alter if I could, which is saying a great deal, I assure you, Emma. You laugh at me about William Larkins, but I could quite as ill spare Robert Martin. He wanted her to look up and smile, and having now brought herself not to smile too broadly, she did, cheerfully answering, You need not be at any pains to reconcile me to the match. I think Harriet is doing extremely well. Her connections may be worse than his. In respectability of character, there can be no doubt that they are. I have been silent from surprise merely, excessive surprise. You cannot imagine how suddenly it has come on me, how peculiarly unprepared I was. For I had reason to believe her very lately more determined against him, much more than she was before. You ought to know your friend best, replied Mr. Knightley, but I should say she was a good-tempered, soft-hearted girl, not likely to be very, very determined against any young man who told her he loved her.
Well, that's true.
That may be true. But she was already fond of Robert Martin from the get-go, so... No.
Yeah, I mean, I think this whole time her feelings for Robert have only been, like, on the back burner.
Yeah.
I don't think she's ever, like, completely forgotten about him.
Yeah. The only reason she ever, I think, stopped that she ever said like kind of cruel things about Robert Martin, about him not being good enough for her.
Yeah.
Which I think she does at one point. Or when she says that she thought Mr. Knightley was on the brink of asking her for affections were engaged, and Emma says maybe he meant to Robert Martin, and she was kind of like, what? Robert Martin? No, you taught me that I deserve better.
Yeah.
You taught me to be vain, and so here I am, vain, thinking I'm too good for Robert Martin, even though he's too good for me.
Yeah.
At least.
But yeah, I think that was largely just Emma's influence.
Yeah. Emma could not help laughing as she answered, upon my word, I believe you know her quite as well as I do. But Mr. Knightley, are you perfectly sure that she has absolutely and downright accepted him? I could suppose she might in time, but can she already? Did you not misunderstand him? You are both talking of other things, of business, shows of cattle, or new drills, and might not you, in the confusion of so many subjects, mistake him? It was not Harriet's hand that he was certain of. It was the dimensions of some famous ox.
Yes, those are subjects that are extremely easy.
What are you talking about, Emma? I can't tell if she's joking here.
That's true. It is hard to tell.
Yeah. The contrast between the countenance and air of Mr. Knightley and Robert Martin. The air of Mr. Knightley and Robert Martin was, at this moment, so strong to Emma's feelings, and so strong was the recollection of all that had so recently passed on Harriet's side, so fresh the sound of those words spoken with such emphasis. No, I hope I know better than to think of Robert Martin. There you go. Yeah. That she was really expecting the intelligence to prove, in some measure, premature. It could not be otherwise. Do you dare say this? Cried Mr. Knightley. Do you dare to suppose me so great a blockhead as not to know what a man is talking of? What do you deserve? What does she deserve, Carolyn?
Oh, a good spanking.
Yes.
I was like, wait, what am I supposed to say?
What was I supposed to say? Sorry.
Nope. Yep.
I was hoping you would follow me, but yeah, you have not said, in case anybody missed it, Carolyn has frequently said you either say she needs or she wants a good spanking, but not she deserves.
Needs a good spanking.
She needs a good spanking.
And I am quoting my late grandmother, who frequently said that while watching my aunt.
2 generations ago, the last time it was really reasonable to believe in spanking.
Well, while watching my aunt's copy of Emma.
Yes.
Like an old...
oh, she actually said that about Emma?
Yeah.
I thought you mentioned that your grandmother said it. I thought you just meant it was something your grandma used to say about people.
No,
that's
I meant
delightful.
About Emma.
She literally meant about Emma.
No,
that's great.
My aunt is a huge Jane Austen fan. She has all the BBC productions from like the 70s and 80s. And whenever she would be watching that one, or she also has the Gwyneth Paltrow one too. But whenever she would be watching one of them, and Grandma was around, Grandma would just get really frustrated.
Yeah.
Declare that Emma needed a good spanking.
She needs an intellectual spanking. At least. All right. Oh, I always deserve the best treatment because I never put up with any other, and therefore you must give me a plain, direct answer. Are you quite sure that you understood the terms on which Mr. Martin and Harriet now are? I am quite sure, he replied, speaking very distinctly, that he told me she had accepted him, and that there was no obscurity, nothing doubtful in the words he used, and I think I can give you proof that it must be so. He asked my opinion as to what he was now to do. He knew of no one but Mrs. Goddard to whom he could apply for the information of her relations or friends. Could I mention anything more fit to be done than to go to Mrs. Goddard? I assured him that I could not. Then, he said, he would endeavor to see her in the course of this day. I am perfectly satisfied, replied Emma with the brightest smiles, and most sincerely wish them happy. You are materially changed since we talked on this subject before. I hope so, for at that time I was a fool. Finally, at least she acknowledges it.
Yes.
And I am changed also, for I am now very willing to grant you all Harriet's good qualities. I have taken some pains for your sake, and for Robert Martin's sake, whom I have always had reason to believe as much in love with her as ever, to get acquainted with her. I have often talked to her a good deal. You must have seen that I did. Sometimes, indeed, I have thought you were half suspecting me of pleading poor Martin's case, which was never the case. Pleading poor Martin's cause, which was never the case. But from all my observations, I am convinced of her being an artless, amiable girl with very good notions, very seriously good principles, and placing her happiness in the affections and utility of domestic life. Much of this, I have no doubt, she may thank you for. Me, cried Emma, shaking her head. Oh, poor Harriet. She checked herself, however, and submitted quietly to a little more praise than she deserved. Their conversation was soon afterwards closed by the entrance of her father. She was not sorry. She wanted to be alone. Her mind was in a state of flutter and wonder, which made it impossible for her to be collected. She was in dancing, singing, exclaiming spirits. Until she had moved about and talked to herself, and laughed and reflected, she could be fit for nothing rational. Wow, it me. Her father's business was to announce James being gone out to put the horses to, preparatory to their now daily drive to Randall's, and she had therefore an immediate excuse for disappearing. The joy, the gratitude, the exquisite delight of her sensations may be imagined. The sole grievance and alloy thus removed in the prospect of Harriet's welfare, she was really in danger of becoming too happy for security. What had she to wish for? Nothing but to grow more worthy of him whose attentions and judgment had been ever so superior to her own. Nothing but that lessons of her past folly might teach her humility and circumspection in the future. Serious she was, very serious, in her thankfulness and in her resolutions, and yet there was no preventing a laugh sometimes in the very midst of them. She must laugh at such a close, such an end of the doleful disappointment of 5 weeks back. Such a heart, such a Harriet. Now there would be pleasure in her returning. Everything would be a pleasure. It would be a great pleasure to know Robert Martin. I'm glad at least she now recognizes, yes, this is the best case scenario. This is how it should all have played out. I'm very happy. Harriet is, without her being involved even a tiny bit.
Yeah.
Which this is something I would put to Autumn de Wilde if I had the chance. The way you have to, all of this stuff that happens in the last 10 chapters of the book has to be sped up a bit in a movie, right? As is the case with the whole book. But I like that in the book, neither Mr. Knightley nor Emma nor anyone else is even a little bit involved. Robert and Harriet take matters into their, Mr. Knightley sends him to.
I think Mr. Knightley's a little
bit involved. A teeny little bit, because he sends Robert.
Yeah.
But he didn't, I don't think he said he was specifically hoping that he would see Harriet, but maybe he was.
I kind of think.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, Mr. Knightley's a little bit involved, but still.
Yeah, because he was kind of sounding Harriet out to see if she maybe still had feelings for Robert.
Yeah, he's definitely never given up the ship.
Yeah.
But he doesn't go to Robert Martin and be like, look.
No,
you should try your hand again, because
he's not actually making. He's just like,
you didn't tell him what to do.
If I put them in a situation where they are,
I'm gonna at least give them an opportunity they might not have otherwise.
Yeah,
but he didn't tell him oh, hey, heads up.
Yeah,
Harriet's a little bit fragile right now. You could scoop in and or something like that. You know,
no, yeah.
Anyway, I'm glad she's now yes, this is totally reasonable. Robert Martin sounds like a great guy. He's totally deserving of Harriet. And she even acknowledges, he might even have a better position in life than Harriet. She finally acknowledges that it's not a foregone conclusion that Harriet's secret parents are, magically rich people who, for some reason, gave their child away to a random provincial school.
Right, yeah.
All right. It would be a pleasure to know Robert Martin, yes. High in the rank of her most serious and heartfelt felicities was the reflection that all necessity of concealment from Mr. Knightley would soon be over. The disguise, equivocation, mystery, so hateful to her to practice, might soon be over. She could now look forward to giving him that full and perfect confidence which her disposition was most ready to welcome as a duty. In the gayest and happiest spirits, she set forward with her father, not always listening, but always agreeing to whatever he said, and whether in speech or silence, conniving at the comfortable persuasion of his being obliged to go to Randall's every day, or poor Mrs. Weston would be disappointed. They arrived. Mrs. Weston was alone in the drawing room, but hardly had they been told of the baby, and Mr. Woodhouse received the thanks for coming which he asked for, when a glimpse was caught through the blind of two figures passing near the window. "It is Frank and Miss Fairfax," said Mrs. Weston. "I was just going to tell you of our agreeable surprise in seeing them arrive this morning. He stays till tomorrow, and Miss Fairfax has been persuaded to spend the day with us. They are coming in, I hope." In half a minute they were in the room. Emma was extremely glad to see him, but there was a degree of confusion and a number of embarrassing recollections on each side. They met readily and smiling, but with a consciousness which at first allowed little to be said. And having all sat down again, there was for some time such a blank in the circle which Emma began to doubt whether the wish now indulged, which she had long felt. Sorry, I got lost in one of these long sentences. They met readily and smiling, but with a consciousness which at first allowed little to be said. And having all sat down, there was for some time such a blank in the circle that Emma began to doubt whether the wish now indulged, which she had long felt, of seeing Frank Churchill once more, and of seeing him with Jane, would yield its proportion of pleasure. What a sentence. What a sentence. When Mr. Weston joined the party, however, and when the baby was fetched, there was no longer a want of subject or animation, or of courage or opportunity for Frank Churchill to draw near her and say, "I have to thank you, Miss Woodhouse, for a very kind, forgiving message in one of Mrs. Weston's letters. I hope time has not made you less willing to pardon. I hope you do not retract what you then said." "No, indeed," cried Emma, most happy to begin. "Not in the least. I am particularly glad to see and shake hands with you, and to give you joy in person." He thanked her with all his heart, and continued some time to speak with serious feelings of his gratitude and happiness. "Is she not looking well?" said he, turning his eyes towards Jane. "Better than she ever used to do? You see how my father and Mrs. Weston dote upon her." Hey, I did not mute my phone. Foolish. They spelled dote D-O-A-T also.
Oh, I've never seen that before.
But they also spell ribbon R-A-B-A-N-D. Riband.
I've seen R-I-B-B-A-N-D before, so I guess that's just a different variation.
Yeah, it was, luckily for the first time it was mentioned in context, it was obvious that they meant ribbon, so I pronounced it that way.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's how it was pronounced, or if they said like riband and pronounced the D. I don't know, but I just said ribbon to make it clear to everyone what was going on. You see how my father and Mrs. Weston dote upon her. But his spirits were soon rising again, and with laughing eyes, after mentioning the expected return of the Campbells, he named the name of Dixon. Emma blushed and forbade its being pronounced in her hearing. "I can never think of it," she cried, "without extreme shame." "The shame," he answered, "is all mine, or ought to be. But is it possible that you had no suspicion? I mean of late. Early I know you had none." "I never had the smallest, I assure you." "That appears quite wonderful. I was once very near, and I wish I had. It would have been better. But though I was always doing wrong things, they were very bad wrong things, and such as did me no service." But though I was always doing wrong things, they were very bad wrong things. That's
doesn't seem like
not a contrast. Yeah. "It would have been a much better transgression had I broke the bond of secrecy and told you everything." "It is now not worth a regret," said Emma. "I have some hope," resumed he, "of my uncle's being persuaded to pay a visit at Randall's. He wants to be introduced to her. When the Campbells are returned, we shall meet them in London, and continue there, I trust, till we may carry her northward. But now I am at such a distance from her. Is it not hard, Miss Woodhouse? Till this morning we have not met since the day of reconciliation. Do not you pity me?" Emma spoke her pity so very kindly that, with a sudden accession of gay thought, he cried,
"You're planning to use that, aren't you?"
"Oh yeah, I was just repeating because I'm like, whoa, I'm going to use that again." Just a sudden accession of gay thoughts.
The title of my memoir.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my God, that would be a sudden accession of gay thoughts. That's got to be the name of some academic paper arguing for some Jane Austen work, or at least some period work being secretly gay.
Probably.
A sudden accession of gay thoughts.
Probably. I've definitely seen
a dissection of the relationship between Emma and Harriet Smith or something. I don't know. Which is not gay at all. But like, I just couldn't think of anybody else off the top of my head who you could even argue. I'm reading 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea right now, and the narrator is describing this one sailor on the ship, and I'm like, whoa. Oh. Chill out, dude. Like, you sound thirsty. Ned Land. Yeah. It's like, he actually says at one point, "I only wish I could live 1,000 years longer that I might continue to think of him," or something like that. And it's like, wow.
I forget. Is the narrator's point of view Is it an omniscient narrator, or is it
No, it's the French professor, the French
it's the professor,
biology
not
or something.
Not his servant. Okay.
No, not his servant. Yeah. Okay. All right. Anyway,
I don't remember anyone's names except Ned Land and who played them in the movie that I saw.
I've never seen an adaptation of it.
Well, Kirk Douglas plays Ned Land. So that tells you all you need to know.
Honestly, when he first describes Ned Land, he's talking about him being very terse and quiet, but like in a way that sounds thirsty. And I'm like, was Jules Verne secretly a Bronte? Like, he's like, oh, he was very terse and kind of cruel and barely ever spoke. But just the way he says it, he's like, ooh.
He's into really Bronte dudes.
All right. Back to a sudden accession of gay thought. By the by, then sinking his voice and looking demure for a moment. I hope Mr. Knightley is well. He paused. She colored and laughed. I know you saw my letter and think you may remember my wish in your favor. Let me return your congratulations. I assure you I have heard the news with the warmest interest and satisfaction. He is a man whom I cannot presume to praise. Emma was delighted and only wanted him to go on in the same style, but his mind was the next moment in his own concerns and with his own Jane, and his next words were, did you ever see such a skin, such smoothness, such delicacy, and yet without being actually fair? One cannot call her fair. It is a most uncommon complexion with her dark eyelashes and hair, a most distinguishing complexion, so peculiarly a lady in it, just color enough for beauty. First of all, gross. Second of all, like, what a weird thing to suddenly speak very specifically about, not just...
Have you ever seen such a skin?
Yeah, such a skin.
It's like... Okay.
It's weird. It's kind of creepy, especially the line "just color enough for beauty." Ugh. But also, it's like weird thing to suddenly point at your girlfriend and be like, "Doesn't she have a lovely complexion?"
Yeah,
and her teeth. I have always admired her complexion," replied Emma archly. "But I do not remember the time when you found. But do I not remember the time when you found fault with her for being so pale? When we first began to talk of her, have you quite forgotten?" "Oh, no, what an impudent dog I was. How could I dare?" But he laughed so heartily at the recollection that Emma could not help saying, "I do suspect that in the midst of your perplexities at the time, you had very great amusement in tricking us all. I am sure you had. I am sure it was a consolation to you." "Oh, no, no, no. How can you suspect me of such a thing? I was a most miserable wretch." "Not quite so miserable as to be insensible to mirth. I am sure it was a source of high entertainment to you to feel you were taking us all in. Perhaps I am the readier to suspect, because, to tell you the truth, I think it might have been some amusement to myself in the same situation. I think there is a little likeness between us." He bowed. If not in our dispositions," she presently added, with a look of true sensibility, "there is a likeness in our destiny, the destiny which binds fair to connect us with two characters so much superior to our own." "True, true," he answered warmly. "No, not true on your side. You can have no superior, but most true on mine." True, true. Oh, wait, no, the polite thing would be to to agree on my own behalf and not on hers. Oops.
Yeah. Like, never mind.
She's a lady, I forgot.
Yeah.
"You can have no superior, but most true on mine. She is a complete angel. Look at her. Is she not an angel at every gesture? Look at her, man. She's an angel. Observe the turn of her throat. Observe her eyes as she is looking up at my father. You will be glad to hear," inclining his head and whispering seriously, "that my uncle means to give her all my aunt's jewels. They are to be new set. I am resolved to have some in an ornament for her head. Will it not be beautiful in her dark hair?" "Very beautiful indeed," replied Emma, and she spoke so kindly that he gratefully burst out, "How delighted I am to see you again, and to see you in such excellent looks. I would not have missed this meeting for the world. I should certainly have called at Hartfield had you failed to come." The others had been talking of the child, Mrs. Weston giving an account of a little alarm she had been under the evening before from the infant's appearing not quite well. She believed she had been foolish, but it had alarmed her, and she had been within half a minute of sending for Mr. Perry. Perhaps she ought to be ashamed, but Mr. Weston had been almost as uneasy herself. In 10 minutes, however, the child had been perfectly well again. This was her history, and particularly interesting it was to Mr. Woodhouse, who commended her very much for thinking of sending for Perry, and only regretted that she had not done it. She should always send for Perry if the child appeared in the slightest degree disordered, were it only for a moment. Because as you know, babies are never disagreeable for a moment for anything other than something that deserves a doctor.
They never have gas.
Yeah, no. She could not be too soon alarmed, nor send for Perry too often. That is what Mr. Woodhouse would say.
It's great parenting advice.
It was a pity, perhaps, that he had not come last night, for though the child seemed better now, very well considering, it would probably have been better if Perry had seen it. Frank Churchill caught the name. Perry, said he to Emma, and trying as he spoke to catch Miss Fairfax's eye. My friend Mr. Perry. What are they saying about Mr. Perry? Has he been here this morning? And how does he travel now? Has he set up his carriage? Emma soon recollected and understood him, and while she joined in the laugh, it was evident from Jane's countenance that she too was really hearing him, though trying to seem deaf. Such an extraordinary dream of mine, he cried. I can never think of it without laughing. She hears us, Miss Woodhouse. I see it in her cheek, her smile, her vain attempt to frown. Look at her. Do not you see that at this very instant, the very passage of her own letter which sent me the report is passing under her eye, that the whole blunder is spread before her, that she can attend to nothing else, though pretending to listen to the others? Jane was forced to smile completely for a moment, and the smile was partly remained as she turned towards him, and said in a conscious, low, steady voice, Shut up. How can you bear such recollections is astonishing to me. They will sometimes obtrude, but how can you court them? It's a very good point. It's one thing for him to make a slight reference to it, but for him to go on about it, it's like, yeah, we were actually quite upset about it at the time, though. So one little reference is like, hey, remember when that happened? But don't go on.
That was like a bad day in our relationship.
Yeah. Well, also, it was immediately followed by him teasing her about Mr. Dixon, which was like not a good move. So.
Yeah.
He had a great deal to say in return, and very entertainingly. But Emma's feelings were chiefly with Jane in the argument. And on leaving Randall's and falling naturally into the comparison of the two men, she felt that, pleased as she had been to see Frank Churchill, and really regarding him as she did with friendship, she had never been more sensible of Mr. Knightley's high superiority of character. The happiness of this most happy day received its completion in the animated contemplation of his worth which this comparison produced. Well, it is over an hour, so I think as much as I wanted to finish today, I think we need to leave chapter 55. Oh, no, it's only 2.5 pages. I will read it. If it had been more pages than that, I would have left it for tomorrow. But I talked too much today. Perhaps I have talked too much today. Yes. Given myself a headache as well as everyone else. Chapter 55. Here we go, guys. We're in the home stretch.
All right.
If Emma had still, at intervals, an anxious feeling for Harriet, a momentary doubt of its being possible for her to be really cured of her attachment to Mr. Knightley, and really able to accept another man from unbiased inclination, it was not long she had to suffer from the recurrence of any such uncertainty. A very few days brought the party from London, and she had no sooner an opportunity of being 1 hour alone with Harriet than she became perfectly satisfied, unaccountable as it was, that Robert Martin had thoroughly supplanted Mr. Knightley, and was now forming all her views of happiness. Harriet was a little distressed, did look a little foolish at first, and having once owned that she had been presumptuous and silly and self-deceived before, her pain and confusion seemed to die away with the words, and leave her without a care for the past, and with the fullest exultation in the present and future. For as her friend's approbation, Emma had instantly removed every fear of that nature by meeting her with the most unqualified congratulations. Harriet was most happy to give every particular of the evening at Astley's, and the dinner the next day. She could dwell on it all with the utmost delight. But what did the particulars explain? The fact was, as Emma could now acknowledge, that Harriet had always liked Robert Martin. Duh. And that his continuing to love her had been irresistible. Beyond this, it must ever be unintelligible to Emma. The event, however, was most joyful, and every day was giving her fresh reason for thinking so. Harriet's parentage became known. Oh. She proved to be the daughter of a tradesman, rich enough to afford her the comfortable maintenance which had ever been hers, and decent enough to have always wished for concealment.
Okay.
Decent enough to have always wished for concealment? Oh, maybe because...
Is she illegitimate, maybe?
Yeah, presumably.
Oops, sorry.
Dare you. Yeah,
Earthquake.
I think that must be what they're implying.
Yeah,
that
probably.
She was born out of wedlock, but he was rich enough that he wanted to afford her a comfortable living and decent enough to want to conceal her because decent, I think, in this case means like, aware of social things. Maybe he wanted to conceal himself so that nobody knew she was a bastard.
Possibly.
I'm trying to decide if that means more for her sake. Well, for Harriet's sake. We don't know who her mother is.
Well, yeah, but he might have wanted to conceal it for her mother's sake.
Oh, yes. Yeah. And also for Harriet's sake, too.
Because,
so people wouldn't know.
This is why women were like, if they were wealthy enough, they were sent abroad. Or to live with an aunt in the country or something.
Yeah. I do think
for the duration of the pregnancy.
Yes, yeah. I do think that it means he wanted to conceal the unhappy fact that she was
right.
Rather than concealing the child or getting rid of her or something. He just wanted to conceal the unfortunate circumstances.
The social, yeah.
Yeah, and not ruin anyone.
Yeah.
Anyway, such was the blood of gentility which Emma had formerly been so ready to vouch for. It was likely to have been untainted, perhaps, as the blood of many a gentleman. But what a connection had she been preparing for Mr. Knightley, or for the Churchills, or even for Mr. Elton? The stain of illegitimacy, unbleached by nobility or wealth, would have been a stain indeed. Wow.
Oh, jeez.
Well, at least she confirms that that's what they're dealing with, but still, unbleached by nobility or wealth. Jeez. Gross.
Also, it's not like it's Harriet's fault, and it's not. Yeah. Whatever.
Also, poor people having a child out of wedlock is not like worse than rich people doing it. No objection was raised on the father's side. The young man was treated liberally. It was all as it should be. And as Emma became acquainted with Robert Martin, who was now introduced at Hartfield, she fully acknowledged in him all the appearance of sense and worth which could bid fairest for her little friend. I actually had wondered. They introduced in the movie. They mentioned that Harriet found out who her father was finally.
Oh, really?
Around the time she becomes engaged to Robert Martin, but I didn't connect the two things happening at once. But now I'm realizing, because Mr. Knightley talks about Robert Martin's like, I was going to go to Mrs. Goddard, but do you know if there's somebody else I should go to? He would go to Mrs. Goddard, and Mrs. Goddard would say, now is the time when I will reveal who the father is because he has to give his permission.
Oh, I didn't even think of that.
That makes sense.
Okay.
He was probably waiting for that. Like he thought once she has had an offer of marriage, then, because he will, he's still providing for her and Mrs. Goddard knows who he is. So yeah, that makes sense. True. Okay.
What was that about before?
It was all as it should be. And as Emma became acquainted with Robert Martin, who was now introduced at Hartfield, she fully acknowledged in him all the appearance of sense and worth which could bid fairest for her little friend. She had no doubt of Harriet's happiness with any good-tempered man, but with him, and in the home he offered, there would be the hope of more, of security, stability, and improvement. She would be placed in the midst of those who loved her, and had better sense than herself, and who had better sense than herself, retired enough for safety, and occupied enough for cheerfulness. She would never be led into temptation, nor left for it to find her out. She would be respectable and happy, and Emma admitted her to be the luckiest creature in the world, to have created so steady and perversing an affection in such a man, or, if not quite the luckiest, to yield only to herself. Harriet, necessarily drawn away by her engagements with the Martins, was less and less at Hartfield, which was not to be regretted. The intimacy between her and Emma must sink. Their friendship must change into a calmer sort of goodwill, and fortunately what ought to be and must be seemed already beginning, and in the most gradual, natural manner. I'm sure they mean because of her position in life, but I choose to believe it's because they realized that their friendship was built on lies, and neither of them was good for the other. Yeah. I choose to believe that's why.
Yeah.
Before the end of September, Emma attended Harriet to church and saw her hand bestowed on Robert Martin with so complete a satisfaction as no remembrances, even connected with Mr. Elton as he stood before them, could impair. How awkward, because Mr. Elton wouldn't have to be the one to marry them.
Really, yeah. That's, oh my gosh.
Oh, I hope it didn't taint the happiness of the day. Although, knowing Harriet, I can't. She's probably like, what? Mr. Elton? I barely remember who he is.
Probably, yeah. So, does he have to be the one to marry Emma and Mr. Knightley?
I believe so.
I believe so too. Yeah.
Hopefully he has at least enough sense to do his job properly.
At least
as much as he might be rude in social situations.
Since he doesn't have a great deal of other sense.
Yep. Robert, perhaps indeed at that time, she scarcely saw Mr. Elton, but as the clergyman whose blessing at the altar might next fall on herself. Robert Martin and Harriet Smith, the latest couple engaged of the three, were the first to be married. Well, why wait? Why waste time? They'd also been in love the longest, I think.
Yeah.
Well, maybe
well,
not.
No.
Not Frank and Jane,
Frank
maybe.
And Jane.
But Frank and Jane have family reasons to put off.
Yeah.
There has to be mourning.
Yeah. Yes.
You can't get married before mourning is finished. Mourning is a very serious matter.
That's true. I was reading something about how that was another thing that would have been understood to Jane Austen's audience. Like, yes. The period of mourning.
Yeah, and they specifically do mention 3 months of serious mourning must be observed or something like that.
Right.
So they do specifically address it as well.
During which time period, traditionally, you are supposed to wear all black.
Right. Yeah.
So. I couldn't get married in all black at the time, but
right, yeah, but it would have been bad form to get married. Yeah. The only reason you get married, I think, during a period of mourning is if there was some like very serious reason, like somebody was pregnant and you were trying to cover it up or something.
Yeah, or someone had to go off to the war or something like that.
Yeah, so there'd be a very serious reason to break that rule.
Yeah.
Jane Fairfax had already quitted Highbury and was restored to the comforts of her beloved home with the Campbells. The Mr. Churchills were also in town, and they were only waiting for November. The intermediate month was the one fixed on, as far as they dared, by Emma and Mr. Knightley. They had determined that their marriage ought to be concluded while John and Isabella were still at Hartfield, to allow them the fortnight's absence in a tour to the seaside, which was the plan. John and Isabella and every other friend were agreed in approving it. But Mr. Woodhouse, how was Mr. Woodhouse to be induced to consent to letting his daughter have a fucking honeymoon?
Yes.
Who had never yet alluded to their marriage, but as a distant event. Oh, I think she also means for having consent to it happening at an actual specific time.
Yeah.
Not in a few years.
They're just being very indulgent.
Yes, they are. When first sounded on the subject, he was so miserable that they were almost hopeless. A second illusion, indeed, gave less pain. He began to think it was to be, and that he could not prevent it, a very promising step of the mind on its way to resignation. Still, however, he was not happy. Nay, he appeared so much otherwise that his daughter's courage failed. She could not bear to see him suffering, to know him fancying himself neglected, and though her understanding almost acquiesced in the assurance of both the Mr. Knightleys that when once the event was over, his distress would soon be over too, she hesitated. She could not proceed. In this state of suspense they were befriended, not by any sudden illumination of Mr. Woodhouse's mind, or any wonderful change of his nervous system, but by the operation of the same system in another way. Mrs. Weston's poultry house was robbed one night of all her turkeys, evidently by the ingenuity of man. Other poultry yards in the neighborhood also suffered. Pilfering was housebreaking to Mr. Woodhouse's fears. He was very uneasy, and but for the sense of his son-in-law's protection, would have been under wretched alarm every night of his life.
Wow.
This is such a weird thing for her to introduce on the last page, basically, of the book.
Yeah.
The strength, resolution, and presence of mind of the Mr. Knightleys commanded his fullest dependence. While either of them protected him and his, Hartfield was safe. But Mr. John Knightley must be in London again by the end of the first week in November. The result of this distress was that, with a much more voluntary, cheerful consent than his daughter had ever presumed to hope for at the moment, she was able to fix her wedding day, and Mr. Elton was called on, within a month of the marriage of Mr. and Mrs. Robert Martin, to join the hands of Mr. Knightley and Miss Woodhouse. The wedding was very much like other weddings, where the parties have no taste for finery or parade, and Mrs. Elton, from the particulars detailed by her husband, thought it all extremely shabby and very inferior to her own. Very little white satin, very few lace veils, a most pitiful business. Selina would stare when she heard it. But in spite of these deficiencies, the wishes, the hopes, the confidence, the predictions of the small band of true friends who witnessed the ceremony were fully answered in the perfect happiness of the union. The end.
Yeah.
I do. The whole thing with the turkey theft is very weird, but I appreciate that the way they end it is with Mrs. Elton implying that Mrs. Elton was excluded from being invited to the wedding.
Yes.
Which seems like a big move. I'm not surprised per se, but like it definitely to not invite the wife of the vicar.
Yeah. And in such a small town, you would kind of think that a lot of people would be.
I like that she was forced to comment on it from her husband's descriptions of it, and still had plenty to say.
And you can kind of imagine her badgering him.
Oh yeah,
for these descriptions,
every detail.
And he's like,
I don't know.
At some
she
point,
wore a dress.
He's I mean, he's pretty frivolous too, but at some point.
Well, also her whole thing earlier where she said, "Oh, I really prefer simplicity in my dress, but I'm a bride. People expect me to kind of look, turn myself out, what have you. But really, in a month or so, I'll be dressing very simply." But then she's calling Emma's wedding shabby for not having enough white satin and veils.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Whatever you say. Anyway, the end. The book is now over. We did it, you guys. We read Emma. Well done. The only thing next to do is for Carolyn and I to find a place on the internet to rent the new film so Carolyn can see it, because I saw it in the theaters, and even though I had some thoughts about it, in general I very much enjoy it.
Yeah.
And it'll be really interesting, I think, to watch it having just read the book.
I am curious. Yeah,
Normally I advocate for not watching a movie immediately after reading the book, because you're going to remember every little detail and see how it's wrong. But we've both seen adaptations before. I've seen this particular one before.
Yeah.
I don't think we're used to the idea. When you see the first adaptation of a book you love, it's harder to put up with differences.
Yeah.
When you've seen a bunch of them, you kind of get used to the idea that every movie is going to have a different take on the story and what have you. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed listening to this. I thank you, Esty and Michelle, for tuning in almost every day. Thanks everyone else who's watching this after the fact. I hope that you enjoy it. I will now be taking at least a week off. Might even go for 2 weeks. We'll see. Depends on how I feel at the end of the week. I'm leaning towards 2 weeks now, I should just tell you.
Yeah. That's fair.
And during those 2 weeks, I will be deciding, do I want to read another book, which at the moment I feel positively about. And if so, what book I will end up reading. 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea is a good candidate, but that would make me have to stop reading it now, because I'm a couple of chapters in now.
Right.
So I would have to stop reading it and find something else to read. But again, if anybody else has any ideas about what they would like to hear, please let me know. I would love to hear feedback. I'm going to be somewhat limited to what books Carolyn and I have in the house that are in the public domain.
Oh, yes, I was going to get my boxes out.
Yeah, I got to take a look through Carolyn's books. But yeah, SD suggested Sense and Sensibility. I do think I want to take a break from Austen, though. I think it would be... At first, I was like, maybe I should keep the Austen trend going, and I haven't ever read Sense and Sensibility, so I do want to read it. But I think I might like to take a little...
I do have
take a little turn.
It's not
not the same edition.
It's not part of not part of the same series, but I do have it somewhere.
But anyway, I will look at what our options are, and I might at some point post a
Sorry, I just
poll.
had an image of like someone from Newsies.
Poist a. Oh, yes, I know I can get ebooks from the library, Michelle. I really hate reading on screens. I have a Kindle. I haven't touched it in like 5 years at least, probably more. I have a hard time reading on screens. I definitely prefer. If there was a book I really, really wanted to do, or like overwhelmingly the dozens upon dozens of people watching this, baker's dozens even, all wanted one specific book that I didn't have access to, then I would, get an ebook and read it. But at this point, I think my only option, I don't know, the Kindle's like the first gen Kindle, so I don't even know if it can still connect to.
In an episode of Death
get
in Paradise,
new ebooks.
The police chief, the inspector, downloads a PDF of The Count of Monte Cristo and prints the whole thing.
Oh, single-sided?
I have no idea. And then what's more incredible, though, is that he then reads it. like most of the way through. Well, it's a very disjointed episode.
But
I thought it was hilarious that he downloaded the entire book and just printed it on his home computer.
Oh,
like,
boy.
How much toner did you go through, dude?
Yeah, I would definitely seek out an ebook if there was a really strong argument for one particular book I don't have access to. But since nobody has expressed a really strong opinion thus far, and we do have a lot of books. I will be looking through. I'm going to look through Carolyn's collection because it'd be fun to read something I haven't read before. I mean, I did Pride and Prejudice first, and I've read that before.
And there's still a good chance of finding stuff I haven't read before either.
That's true.
In my collection.
That's true. So anyway, if you print it, you better read it, says Michelle. Very good point. If you're going to waste that much paper, I hope you at least read it. So yeah, I might post a poll at some point. If I get down to, if I have like 2 or 3 books that are good candidates, I might post them somewhere and ask people to vote. Esty and Michelle, you guys at least, I will send it to directly to make sure I get your opinions on the subject. So yeah, I guess that's it. Thanks again, everybody, for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. I recorded almost all of this through GarageBand with like my nice, decent microphone. Anyway, there are a couple of chapters which I forgot to record. So if I ever release this anywhere, it would have to be with a few chapters in the YouTube audio. But I may at some point post it somewhere. I recorded it so I would have the option, but I still have no specific ideas on the subject. So anyway, that's a thing. Thanks everyone for listening. Have a good night. The shit's real intense right now. I had a particularly intense day before this, but doing this every day has really given me something to focus on. And 1 hour of the day where I was reading a book with a friend, talking about it, joking about it, sharing it with other people. And I knew I was putting something out into the world that other people would be able to listen to, and have an hour to just listen to something kind of relaxing, and at least 1 hour to not think of what's going on in the world right now. I don't advocate for ignoring it altogether, of course, but at least an hour a day of restful activity is good for your brain and your heart. So I hope that you guys have enjoyed that, because I have too. So on that note, the end.